On November 5th, 1998, a retired pathologist from Charlottesville, Virginia, dropped a 4-page paper into the journal Nature that cracked open almost 200 years of American denial. The headline was brutal. Jefferson fathered a slave's last child. Think about that for a moment. The man on your $2 bill. The man who wrote that all men are created equal, and a single Y-chromosome pulled from a living descendant, saying the quiet part out loud. For 6 generations, historians had sworn it was impossible. What if everything you were taught about Thomas Jefferson in school was built on a lie the family curated on purpose? Because the evidence that finally broke the silence was not a diary, not a letter, not a confession. It was biology. And what the sequencer found in a laboratory in England will change how you see the founding of the United States forever. Here is the problem every investigator ran into before 1998. How do you prove a 200-year-old accusation against a dead president when the only witnesses are long buried? How do you test a man who has no direct male line descendants, who wrote nothing down, and whose own family spent 6 generations burying the story? You cannot. Not with documents, not with letters, not with oral history. You need something that does not lie, something that does not get edited by grandchildren protecting a marble statue. You need a chromosome. But before we get to the test tube, you need to meet the woman American textbooks spent 2 centuries trying to erase. Her name was Sally Hemings. She was born into slavery in 1773 in Charles City County, Virginia. She was 3/4 European by ancestry because her father was John Wales, a wealthy planter. And here is the detail that should stop you cold. John Wales was also Thomas Jefferson's father-in-law. That means Sally Hemings was the half-sister of Jefferson's own dead wife, Martha. Let that sink in for a moment. The enslaved teenager Jefferson brought into his home was his late wife's sibling. And what happens next is where the story gets almost impossible to believe. At the age of 14, she was sent to Paris in 1787 to serve Jefferson's young daughter. Under French law at the time, she was legally free the second she stepped off the ship. She could have walked away. She could have vanished into Paris, but she did not. According to the account later written by her son Madison Hemings and published in the Pike County Republican newspaper in 1873, she negotiated. She agreed to return to Monticello only after Jefferson promised her what Madison called extraordinary privileges, and a guarantee that every child she bore would be freed when they came of age. Think about the weight of that bargain. A pregnant teenager, thousands of miles from home, striking a deal with the man who would later become the 3rd president of the United States. Between 1795 and 1808, Sally Hemings gave birth to at least 6 children at Monticello. And here is the part nobody can explain away. Every single surviving child was eventually freed by Jefferson, the only enslaved family at Monticello ever granted that privilege. Ask yourself the uncomfortable question. Out of more than 600 human beings Jefferson owned across his lifetime, why only hers? The accusation became public on September 1st, 1802. A disgraced journalist named James Thompson Callender published a bombshell in the Richmond Recorder. He claimed that sitting President Thomas Jefferson kept an enslaved woman as his concubine and had fathered several of her children. And this is where the machine kicked in. For the next century and a half, the official Jefferson family line was identical, polished, and unshakable. It was not Thomas. It was his nephews, Samuel and Peter Carr, the sons of his sister. The Carrs, the family insisted, had privately confessed. The case was closed. Generations of historians repeated it like scripture. And they were all about to be proven wrong by a man in a lab coat. Enter Dr. Eugene Foster, a retired pathologist from Charlottesville. In 1996, a friend suggested he try something nobody else had dared. Settle the argument with science. But Foster faced a brutal obstacle. Thomas Jefferson had no surviving legitimate sons. The direct Jefferson male line had gone extinct with his death in 1826. So how do you test a dead man with no male descendants? Foster turned to a clever piece of genetic logic. The Y chromosome passes almost unchanged from father to son, generation after generation, with only rare mutations. And here is the trick no historian had thought to try. If Foster could find living male line descendants of Jefferson's paternal uncle, a man named Field Jefferson, those men would carry the same distinctive Y chromosome signature that Thomas Jefferson himself once carried. Same uncle, same signature. Here is why that matters. Because now Foster had a fingerprint for a ghost. He collected blood from 14 men, 5 male line descendants of Field Jefferson, to establish the authentic Jefferson Y chromosome haplotype. 5 male line descendants of Thomas Woodson, a man long rumored among his own family to be Sally Hemings' firstborn. 3 male line descendants of John Carr, the grandfather of the Carr nephews, to finally put the family alibi under a microscope. And, most critically, 1 male line descendant of Eston Hemings. Eston was Sally's youngest known son, born May 21, 1808, inside the walls of Monticello, while Thomas Jefferson was in residence. Foster partnered with a genealogist named Herbert Barger to verify every single bloodline by hand. Then the samples were flown to laboratories in Oxford, England, and in Leiden in the Netherlands for Y chromosome haplotype analysis. And what came back will make you rethink everything you were told about founding fathers. On November 5, 1998, Foster and his co-authors published their findings in Nature, Volume 396. The Jefferson Y chromosome haplotype turned out to be rare. It did not match any of the 5 other old-line Virginia families Foster tested as controls. It was a unique genetic signature. And then came the hammer blows. The Carr descendants, the nephews the family had been blaming for almost 2 centuries, their Y chromosomes looked nothing like the Jefferson pattern. The alibi that had stood since 1802 evaporated in a single column of data. Thomas Woodson's male line descendants were also not a Jefferson match, meaning the oral tradition that identified him as Sally's firstborn was wrong. But the single male line descendant of Eston Hemings, the youngest child born in 1808, carried the exact Field Jefferson haplotype. A perfect match. Foster's team calculated the probability that Eston's father was a Jefferson male at greater than 99%. That is not a coincidence. That is a fingerprint on a crime scene 200 years cold. Here is the complication the cable news headlines refuse to explain. The Y chromosome alone could not tell you which Jefferson male. Thomas had a younger brother, Randolph Jefferson, plus 5 Randolph nephews, all carrying that same rare signature. Approximately 25 adult Jefferson males walking around Virginia at the time could theoretically have donated that chromosome. Critics jumped on it fast. But this is where the historians went back to the archives and started stacking evidence the DNA alone could not provide. And what they found made the case airtight. Thomas Jefferson was documented at Monticello during every single one of Sally Hemings' conception windows across more than 20 years. Not one, not most, every single one. No other Jefferson male has any such record. In January of 2000, the Thomas Jefferson Foundation at Monticello convened a research committee, reviewed everything, and formally affirmed that Thomas Jefferson was the father, not just of Eston, but of all 6 of Sally Hemings' children. In 2018, Monticello opened a permanent exhibit dedicated to Sally Hemings' life, inside the very quarters where she lived. The marble statue had officially cracked. And here is what hurts the most about what the DNA forced America to confront. The man who wrote that all men are created equal owned more than 600 human beings across his lifetime. He fathered children with one of them. He kept those children enslaved into adulthood. And 3 of Sally Hemings' surviving children, Beverly, Harriet, and Eston, were so light-skinned that after Jefferson's death, they crossed the color line and spent the rest of their lives as white Americans. Their descendants, for generations, had no idea who their ancestor really was. They thought they were descended from an uncle, or a stranger, or nobody at all. Until one Y-chromosome, one peer-reviewed study, and one stubborn pathologist from Charlottesville made the invisible visible. Let that sit with you for a moment. Entire family trees, entire American lives, reshaped by a single test tube opened in 1998. How much more of the history you were taught is hiding in plain sight, waiting for a sequencer to find it? How many other founding figures are we about to be completely wrong about? Because the lesson of the Foster study is not really about Jefferson. It is about what happens when biology walks into a room that history has sealed shut for 200 years. The documents can be edited, the diaries can be burned, the family stories can be rehearsed for 6 generations, but the chromosome does not care. Almost 2 centuries of careful denial, one rare Y chromosome from an 81-year-old man in Charlottesville, a founding father's hidden family, pulled out of the shadows by 4 pages in a scientific journal. If you want to see what forensic science can do to the ghosts of the powerful, hit that subscribe button, because next time we are opening the file on another buried secret that DNA refused to let rest. Drop your theory in the comments, ring the bell, and remember, on this channel, the evidence never lies.